Isaac, you've got your baby blue on today because you've got your Jays coming up soon.
Yeah, the season opener is next Thursday, I think.
Okay. I remember, I don't know if you ever made the pilgrimage down to Seattle. Do they even still have a team? Do the Mariners exist anymore?
Yeah, they do. I saw that some of the Jays fans might be boycotting the Seattle games this year because that's obviously one of their best series is for Seattle because the stadiums are filled with Jays fans and the
Oh, yeah.
hotels in the city. I mean, everything, right?
Yeah. Oh, because Trump
Yeah, because
bad?
of the
Oh,
tariffs. Yeah, yeah.
okay. Well,
Yeah.
I'm not just saying, I'm not sure how many people in Seattle are huge Trump voters. Like, I'm
True.
going out on a limb here and wondering about that. I'm dating myself, but I remember going down to Seattle and Ken Griffey Jr. was playing for the Mariners, and we got to meet him down on the field. It was super cool. So, yeah. Alex, do you follow the baseball?
No, but I did go to Seattle to cover the U.S. election, and your intuition is correct. Like most people just didn't even care, right? They said like it's a foregone conclusion in
Well,
Washington at least.
Well, we definitely need some happy distractions. So I will be looking forward to the baseball season started. Okay, speaking of starting, let's get this thing going. All right, welcome to Off the Record. My name is Kris Sims. I'm the Alberta Director for the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. I'm joined by Alex Zoltan and Isaac Lamoureux from True North. Fellas, there's lots to talk about here, and I wanted to get going because we have a pretty packed show. First up, I don't know if I had this on my bingo card. US President Donald Trump went on Fox News, and I think it was on Ingram, and said that he would prefer that the selected Prime Minister Mark Carney of Canada, he'd prefer that he stay on the job because I don't quite know the clip. So let's actually listen to how Trump phrased this. Give this a listen.
We have much more.
I don't think so.
Just so you understand, we subsidize Canada, and I like Canada. I love Canada. I love Wayne
now
Gretzky.
the Liberal guys,
I love his wife.
the Liberal
I love
Party is going to
everything.
win now in the next election,
I don't
most
care.
likely. And they were
I don't care.
down and out.
I don't
Isn't that
care.
going to make them more hostile to us and possibly
I'd rather
open the
deal with
door
a liberal than a
for
conservative.
China closer to Canada, and that would really put us in a bind.
The conservative that's running is stupidly no friend of mine. I don't know him, but he said negative things. So when he says negative things, I couldn't care less. I think it's easier to deal, actually, with a liberal. And maybe they're going to win, but I don't really care. It doesn't matter to me at all.
So your end game is what with them?
My end game is I don't want to have a big deficit. I don't want to see the United States of America, and you say 60 and I say 200, but it doesn't matter. I don't want us to pay 60 or 200 billion dollars to a country that if they were a state, think of this, he would be our biggest, most beautiful, it would be great.
Yeah. you know, there was, I forget who said it might have been Pierre Trudeau who said it's like living next to an elephant.
He did, yeah.
And you're a mouse.
That was Pierre.
And I've never quite understood that until right now, where I roll over in bed in the morning around 5 and I check my Twitter or my X to find out what the hell is happening now, all the time. And so even if I, like the idea of lower taxes in the States and that sort of stuff, man, this is really shaking things up. Alex, what was your take on that? Why do you think he said that?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I really don't like to engage in the game of trying to read Donald Trump's mind because I just don't think it's really a good use of our time. Because it's really impossible and it's unfalsifiable anyway. What I will say about Donald Trump, somebody else had said this and it really struck me. When he says stuff, the spirit is always right, but the details are all wrong. And so when he says 60 billion or 200 billion, it doesn't really matter. Well, actually, sir, it does. Right? Like if this is a problem that you're trying to solve, like it's important to know the details and the facts.
Isaac?
Yeah, I don't know what to think of the things Trump has done, especially for the Conservatives' campaign and what that means for the next federal election in Canada, because some people I've spoken with have thought that Trump's proposed tariffs, for example, have hurt the Conservatives in their campaign against the Liberals, and we've seen the Liberals gain ground in the polls. But the most interesting thing, Kris, that I want to talk about, which is a completely different story that I wrote about, was the OECD report, which went into a proposed tariff scenario and who would be the big winners and losers, not nationwide, worldwide,
Mhm.
worldwide. And guess what? U.S. would lose, Canada would lose. Who would win? China. I don't think that's what Donald Trump wants. He's definitely not pro-China. So maybe in reading that report, he might start to change his mind, because look, the tariffs are hurting the American people even more than us. We see their GDP is going to go down more than ours is. So we're going to be hurt. They're going to be hurt. China's going to be the winner. How is this the situation we find ourselves in, where China is profiting from a trade war between North American countries? I can't believe it.
So I keep getting phone calls from people and emails about tariffs because they can feel really complicated, but ultimately tariffs are just trade taxes. So, and this is one of the things where when people are saying here in Canada of, hey man, his whole 51st state talk is really ticking me off. Like, I totally get it. Like, somebody walks up, punches you in the face, you want to punch back, but you got to be smart about this. And if we put in retaliatory tariffs, all we're doing is tying our own shoelaces together before our fight. Like, we got to be more calculated about this. And so, to your point on the numbers he was throwing around, it doesn't matter. It really does. Like, one of my friends one of my friends on the air used to be described as volume on 10, facts on 3. Like,
right.
so,
right.
you know, great.
That's Donald Trump.
Yeah,
for
and
sure.
so it's one of those things where you're like, really? Like, because this is now what's frustrating here is that regardless of your politics, if you're like a Poilievre guy or a Carney person or a Trump person, whatever, it isn't the rulers who feel this stuff. When these sorts of people start getting into a big trade tariff war, it is only normal working people who feel this stuff. It's the person at the grocery store who's suddenly paying double for peanut butter. It's the person who is in the aluminum plant who is worried about losing his job, which is devastating. Like, you lose your house, you lose your car. Like, that is not something people just shake off. And so this is where whenever sort of these kind of statements and eruptions happen from the media in the States, it's just like, okay, again, how do we deal with this? But yeah, we'll see. That wasn't something I was expecting. However, having read his book, The Art of the Deal, and I'm currently listening to his later one, like Kicking Butt in Politics. I can't remember what it was called. He's always keying in on like the fracture in the bone. He's always feeling for the weakness or the chink in the armor. And so the language there that he used of easier to deal with, I think that was what he was getting at. So I would recommend everybody always read the books of political leaders because they have a lot of control over you. Who wants to take this kind of a surprising video? I didn't realize that the vandalism had gotten to this point in Canada. I was seeing some footage from the States, but apparently there was some vandalism at a Tesla place in Canada. Alex, did you want to take that?
Yeah, so apparently they spray painted a Tesla showroom, I guess you would call it, in Montreal. That follows some vandalism that occurred on a Tesla lot in Las Vegas. There was an attack in Kansas City. There was a protest here in Vancouver, or Metro Vancouver and Surrey on the weekend. And also they have removed the automaker Tesla from the Vancouver Auto Show as well on account of security concerns.
Wait, just a second. So I grew up in BC and I lived in like Lower Mainland quite a bit. And I've got a weird thing where I notice the makes of cars like all the time. Like, it just ticks by like a mental ticker. I will say the Langley, Surrey area, like there's a lot of Teslas there, like way more than anywhere else I've ever lived. So you're saying that the Vancouver car show isn't letting Tesla in now? Oh,
correct.
Wow.
Yeah, they've been banished on security concerns, which seems kind of wrong, right? I mean, it's not like Tesla chose for them to be a security concern, right? It kind of seems like you're almost rewarding the vandals at that point, right? You're canceling Tesla for being a victim of crime.
Let's watch the video. I think we have a clip from what happened in Montreal.
Hey everybody, I'm currently at Tesla dealership in Montreal, and as you can see behind me, this is what happened this morning. There is two activists who came here to throw paint, the pink paint at the Tesla dealership. This is the first attack against Tesla here in Canada. So I will have my full report coming soon. Stay tuned.
I just want to point out the irony of now people are protesting electric cars. Like, it's really hard for me to keep up. Like, I know the taxpayers have helped, underwrite and fund some of the electric car manufacturing in Canada, and that was a huge push coming from folks who generally vote NDP and Liberal. And now to see vandalism happening of an I think they're completely electric. I don't even know if Tesla makes hybrids. Like, I did not have this on my bingo card. Isaac, what was your thoughts on this? I don't know if you're a car guy, but I was kind of surprised to see, because Teslas are popular, legit popular in the Vancouver area.
Well, I have my problems with Teslas living in Edmonton, where it's like -50 sometimes.
Right.
That ain't gonna do you too good. I mean, it's spring for most people. It's still like almost -10 here, and the snow's melting, which is good. And -10. It's funny, actually. It was like -10 or 20 the other day, and my neighbor's outside in his shorts and t-shirt was shoveling his walk, and I'm like, oh,
Edmonton.
-10, yeah, shorts weather. But yeah, I was thinking about this last night, completely unrelated to the Tesla, but just about the cult-like ideology of people that we've seen. I mean, really, they don't care what the cause is that they're fighting against. Before it was oil and gas, now it's electrical vehicle companies, complete opposite things. Before they hated Canada, now they love Canada. It changes at the flip of a switch when they're the people they look up to in politics, let's say, tell them what they need to hate. But perhaps what they're lacking is the reasoning behind it all and the critical thinking that actually lets us know why we believe what we believe.
I will say, I spent 25 years, most of it, as a mainstream journalist, and so I've cut thousands of clips. Back in the day when we used to have to hand tape to each other, like big ones, Betamax tapes. And so I'd sit there and toggle and cut, and it would be a 10-second clip or a 2-minute clip. I don't care who's talking, could be left, right, whatever, space alien. Listen to the entire thing. Always listen to the entire conversation. Always watch the entire interview. Always watch the entire press conference. Get the context, and then make up your own mind. Totally fine to make up your own mind. But just a bit of advice, as somebody who's cut clips before, always watch the entire thing for context. It's one of those things where you can really get a crowd of people going in one direction, based on a little bit of information. I wanted to shift gears here, no pun intended. Do Teslas have gear? Like, I don't even know. I've never driven a fully electric car. Like, I love cars. Love them, but I don't even know if the transmission engages in the same way. Okay, let's shift gears to Pierre Poilievre had a huge announcement this week. And at first, people might be forgiven for thinking, oh, this isn't that different. Poilievre vows to scrap the carbon tax. For real. Now, some of you might be thinking, he's literally got that on a t-shirt. He's been doing Axe the Tax rallies now for, more than a year straight. This is a big one, though, because he is the first major Canadian politician to come out and say no carbon taxes, none, meaning no industrial carbon tax, no consumer carbon tax. And he's on the record many times saying no second carbon tax, which was a weird carbon tax that was buried in fuel regulations, especially there in BC, Alex. You guys pay it through the nose. So for him to come out and say this, like it was like a huge thing, it's a big deal for two main reasons. One, it will save Canadians like billions of dollars, like mega money here. Because, of course, as of right now, industries that are nailed with the industrial carbon tax are not eating this cost. They are passing that down to you, from the fuel refinery down to the pump, from the utilities company down to your home heating. Same thing at fertilizer plants. They're charging farmers more, which increases your price of food. It is a major trickle down. It's just harder for you to see the pain as a carbon taxpayer. And second, and this is key, by obliterating the industrial carbon tax, it removes the ability for politicians to hide the consumer carbon tax, the way that Carney is saying he's going to. Alex, I'll let you take the first run at this. What was your thoughts when you saw this announcement?
Well, I actually have more of a question because I'm kind of on the crime beat right now, so I'm a little bit outside of this area. It's not in my circle of knowledge. Let's just put it that way. So, Kris, I'm curious. So, if Poilievre were to get rid of the carbon tax, what would happen in provinces where they've instituted their own carbon tax proactively, like in BC, for instance? Would we still have a carbon tax? I'm just curious. I don't know.
So a few things there. Number one, when he made the announcement about the industrial carbon tax, he was talking about the forced federal industrial carbon tax.
Okay.
So just from what I know of him, because I go back quite a while, he's not the type to force a province to stop imposing an industrial carbon tax. He might think it's dumb. Or he might talk to the premier, but that's not usually his bag. But as of right now, he has said it's the federal industrial forcing of it, which is what is happening right now. And also, this is key, it's what Carney wants to crank up. Carney has said he is going to shift the carbon tax cost that we can all see, because it annoys him that we can see the carbon tax cost because the peasants get uppity, right? So he's going to shift it over there and then crank it up. So that federal element will be gone. However, the first carbon tax that you guys pay visibly, like the one that shows up on your FortisBC natural gas bills, your premier, David Eby, has promised to get rid of that BC carbon tax if the federal backstop is removed. And Carney has said he's reducing the federal one to zero. That's when he signed that weird piece of paper. And he said immediately, but the paperwork says April 1st, so a bit of a discrepancy there. But he does say he's going to reduce it to zero. And if he does do that legit, that is saving you $13 per minivan. It's saving you $20 per pickup fill up. And that's saving the average Canadian family about $400 per year on their home winter heating. That's the first carbon tax, the one that Carney promises he's reducing to zero. Eby is on the record, you might remember from the provincial election, saying, if they go first, we'll go second, and we'll match them.
Right.
So, pitter patter. Isaac, did you have thoughts on this huge carbon tax announcement?
Oh, many thoughts, yes. No, Kris, this goes back to what you were saying about watching the whole clip, because I remember, and how I came to know of this was Poilievre pulled up the carbon tax law at a press conference and said, hey guys, Carney said he's removing carbon tax. He can't actually do that. This is the carbon tax law that that legislates what the carbon tax is. Parliament's prorogued. You can't get rid of this law until it comes back. Here's the law. I have it in my hands. Or Poilievre did. The act in his hands. And he actually broke it down for a normal person to understand who was just listening to that press conference, which I think is really key when we're talking about this complex issues. As we saw with Alex, even a reporter, he had to ask you a question right away, like it's not entirely clear. And just bringing it back to the industrial carbon tax, how it's a hidden tax. We've of course talked before on the show, Kris, about my heating bill and how the carbon tax was more than the energy itself. Now, if they raise the industrial carbon tax, that's not going to be on there. But guess what? The energy will go up because it costs the company more to produce that energy. You think they're going to absorb that cost? They're not. I'm going to absorb that. And it won't be on my bill as carbon tax. It'll just be I'm magically paying 1.5 times more for energy. I wonder what could have happened there. Oh, maybe it's because the industrial sector is paying more for the energy.
Oh yeah, and this is their, like, straight up, this is their playbook. Like Mark Carney, his book is out of my reach right now. I don't want to unplug my earphone. Like Mark Carney wrote a 507-page book, okay, cheerleading carbon taxes. Carbon taxes are a keystone to his worldview. He says that carbon taxes must exist and continuously increase. The Carbon Tax Center, which is kind of a clearinghouse for information on the carbon tax around the world, there's language in there. It's not their own language. It's just stuff that they're reposting for information. But there's language on there that is basically counseling politicians who have to deal with us uppity peasants who don't like a visible carbon tax. It's counseling them to do things like a cap and trade carbon tax, which is still a carbon tax, but you just can't see it. Massive industrial carbon taxes. And it even says, which is a safe harbor for politicians who are shy about facing irate voters. It is just so disgustingly undemocratic.
I think it's interesting that Carney keeps calling the carbon tax divisive, right? Which is like a really interesting use of language. I don't know if it's divisive so much as it's just wildly unpopular, because a carbon tax is very immoral when you think about it, because heating and gas, they live on a very inelastic demand curve, right? Like you don't have an option of whether or not to heat your home in Edmonton. If you don't, you freeze to death. You don't have an option of whether or not you can drive to work or not, or else you lose your job and you can't pay your heating and you freeze to death. It's like putting a tax on insulin for diabetics, right? There's something incredibly immoral and unjust about that. So I find the language divisive to be almost, Yeah, it's a strange use of the word.
It is. I will point out, um, so Franco Terrazzano, our federal director for the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, wrote a book on this. It's going to be coming out soon. It's already available for pre-order on Amazon. I just finished voicing the thing and I'm editing it, which is taking forever. But this is why I can recall all this stuff fresh. What's upsetting is that politicians have known this, the immorality that you point out here, Alex. They've known this for a long time. Very briefly, where you are right now, the carbon tax was hatched back in 2008, and politicians at the time promised many things. They said that the carbon tax was going to be revenue neutral. They said that the carbon tax was going to create an abundance of affordable alternative energies that people could just switch to. To your point, Alex, this is not like choosing between paper or plastic shopping bags. No, most people don't have that affordable, alternative, abundant energy source to switch to. They would have done it by now. They're just beaten into a financial corner. And this is key for any of my folks who are huge environmentalists and they hug trees like I have done. Like, I hear you. This is not an environmental solution. Because when British Columbia first hatched the carbon tax in 2008, they promised that the carbon tax would reduce emissions by 33% below 2007 levels by 2020. Guess what? They went up instead. So it doesn't work anywhere you slice this thing. And very briefly, one more thing on this industrial carbon tax thing. This is what blows my mind coming from Carney. And this is fresh from Carney. This is not dug up from his book from 2 years ago. It's what he said out loud with his face. He says he wants to crank up the industrial carbon tax and create carbon tax tariffs. So stuff coming into Canada for the first time ever will have a carbon tax punishment coming from a country that doesn't have one, i.e. the United States, making stuff cost more for Canadians. That does two things, okay? Which is super stupid, especially right now. One, it makes stuff cost more here. Two, there's a guy named Donald Trump, the president of the United States, who's ringing a dinner bell right now, trying to get industry to come to America. Well, guess what's going to happen to those manufacturing plants in Ontario? I'm looking at you, Ontario. They're just going to pick up and move.
Yeah, I'm going to be a bit of a jerk to all sides of the political spectrum and say that 25% tariffs on Canadian goods to solve the fentanyl crisis is just as dim-witted as thinking you can change the weather with taxes. To tariffs, as you mentioned.
Yeah, tariffs are just trade taxes, and they just make things and life more expensive for normal people. Did we want to get into, this was quite the eyebrow-raising moment. Premier Danielle Smith here in our home province of Alberta, Isaac, kind of throwing down the gauntlet, right? So I was trying to read this to understand it, but I haven't had enough time to really analyze it. Basically, what I understand is this. She's going to designate our oil and gas sites and the data as kind of protected so the feds can't look at it. Like, what was your take on this, Isaac? What'd you get from this?
Yeah, a few things I want to cover. Firstly, just touching on the tax, we've seen, of course, Alberta go to war against the feds uncountable amount of times on these carbon taxes, and we've seen nationwide too. The emissions have only ever gone up with the carbon taxes. They do absolutely nothing for emissions, and we've seen that in Alberta. They've been saying the same things. Look, we can reduce our emissions with technology. Taxes are not the option. In fact, empowering industry will help because it will boost technology. And now, speaking of industry, here's Alberta saying to Ottawa, you can't access our oil and gas industry at all. Off limits, completely off limits. We've seen them, of course, go to battle with the feds many times over the oil and gas emissions cap. And it's in its past forms. It seems to keep evolving, although they don't really change anything. They just say they did. And they've even taken them to court before and won various times, where, of course, the No More Pipelines Act, I think it was deemed unconstitutional.
Yep.
And here's what Alberta is saying. Again, if you're trying to violate our jurisdiction, not going to happen. So they basically updated their act to take it to the next level where Ottawa can't even get Alberta's data. So all these impact assessment acts, whatever, they're based on emissions data. They won't even have the data. So how are they going to know what's happening in Alberta? I mean, I certainly don't blame Alberta. Like I said, they're actually trying to not only empower industry but reduce their emissions. Unlike Ottawa, who are just trying to tax people and do nothing about emissions, though they virtue signal and say, "Oh, this will reduce emissions." We know from the data itself, by the way, from the data that in these taxes do nothing to reduce emissions. In fact, they do the opposite. Whereas Alberta is actually trying to empower industry and implement best practices and technologies that will and are reducing emissions. And another report I read recently, I forgot which one it was. Anyways, yeah, look, Canada can actually be a global player in energy because we have clean energy, and the alternative is getting very, very dirty energy from coal producing plants in China. So, yeah, if we actually boost up our energy and get it worldwide, we can actually do something in global emissions, not just our little country of 40 odd million people.
Yeah, to your point, again, Canada is responsible for about 1.4% of global emissions. We're really fighting on the wrong end of that arithmetic problem if we're really concerned about global emissions. I will quickly point out, I think I saw language such as if the feds try to get into these offices to get this data, it will be like a trespassing situation. So, like, things is getting real. I will also point out that the Parliamentary Budget Officer, the PBO, okay, the nonpartisan watchdog of the federal budget, has came out with a report very recently. I did a stand up in front of a pumper there, pump jack, and it would cost, so the production cap, they call it an emissions cap, but it's a production cap coming from Ottawa, imposed on Alberta's oil and gas sector. This is the data from this report. That move would blow a $20 billion hole in the Canadian economy and slash more than 40,000 jobs.
Chris,
So,
it's 20.5 billion, and I know because I know the report, and 54,400 jobs. I think it was by 2032, but yes.
wow,
Yeah.
that is an astonishing amount, just an astonishing amount. Alex, you're there in the Lower Mainland. You're actually in New West, the original capital of British Columbia for history nerds. Alex, what's your take on this? What did you think when you heard this gauntlet being thrown down?
Yeah, I'm curious. Again, I have another question because I'm not as
Yeah,
knowledgeable on this as I probably should be. How much
no,
does
no,
the
no.
federal government collect from the carbon tax?
How much does the federal government collect from the federal carbon tax?
Yeah,
Around $13 billion
because I
in
guess
a
my
year.
concern, and I'm just playing devil's advocate, so forgive me. As we all know, the federal government is so bloated as it is, and they already can't afford to basically run operations with a balanced budget. Can they afford to lose the carbon tax?
Yes, because they need to cut spending like a
Right. No,
machete.
no, no. I agree with
Yeah.
that, of course. I absolutely, yeah. Out of principle, I mean,
Yeah.
obviously, we're all,
Yeah.
right of center, and we're all, would rather have a smaller government. But just theoretically speaking, if Carney wants to keep the existing federal government intact as it currently is, can he even afford to get rid of the carbon tax?
No, he would add on to the debt. He would straight
Right.
up add on to the debt, which, by the way, is $1.2 trillion. And as we all famously know, our deficit, which is a little baby debt, deficit is a yearly debt that is piled onto the big honkin' mama debt. Okay, the baby debt for this fiscal year went from the $40 billion mark to around the $60 billion mark. And that is when famously Krista Freeland said, you know what, I'm out of here. I'm not doing this. So yeah, if they kept on spending, I won't even say like drunken sailors. Like a drunken sailor was my best man at my wedding. He was way better with money than the Trudeau government. So if they
Right.
just keep blowing money like this, then no, they would just have an extra $13 billion added on to their
So
debt. The answer, though,
wouldn't
of
this be
course,
a
is to slash
wouldn't this
spending.
be a wouldn't this be a good question for mainstream media?
Yeah, that's a really
How are
good
you going to
question.
afford this?
That's a great question. And you know what he'll probably say? He'll say something like, we're going to make big polluters pay, which translation, use your universal translator from Star Trek, means businesses, industries, job creators,
Right.
all of that's, remember that steel plant that he was standing in with his
Right.
earplugs in and his eye protection and his hard hat? And they couldn't get, apparently the word on the street is, I don't know if this is true, the word on the street is they couldn't get workers to stand behind him, so they made all of the cabinet ministers put on these outfits and just saying, I don't know if many of those cabinet ministers have worn steel toes before in their lives, because they looked a little awkward. I think
And
you look like you might have been.
Alex, just to take it to your neck of the woods there, I
Yeah.
saw a few articles come up recently on if EB were to remove the carbon tax. I think it would leave like a $1.5 billion hole in their budget. And we already know BC is continuously running record deficits, and their credit rating, I think, has decreased like 3 times or something. So I don't know how they're going to deal with losing the carbon tax, the revenue from the carbon tax, because it's revenue neutral. No, it's not. You need that money. You need to tax your citizens, because you're spending in other areas is very irresponsible.
Speaking of spending in other areas, do we want to get into the stuff that Premier Eby spends money on there, Alex?
Ah, yes.
Oh yeah, so I heard that he was eating $57 sandwiches. Is that true?
So the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, my colleague Carson Binda, he's our BC director for the CTF. This is his story. He dug up these FOI documents. So Premier Eby blew more than $118,000 on a huge taxpayer-funded party. Get this. This was not for people from British Columbians around the province who had done great things. This wasn't for people who were raising money for cancer research. Even then, a $57 sandwich is expensive, but it wasn't for any of those noble things. No, it was a huge shaker for bureaucrats. And what got me was it was termed government innovation, which is like an oxymoron. And then they had like a huge party. And this is what blew my mind. 2 things. One, there was the hall they rented cost like $14,000 or something. And it was just like a couple blocks from, the enormous building that we already pay for in Victoria called the Legislature, which has ballrooms and stuff in it. And then also, this is what I can't understand. And I'm going to throw it to you guys, Alex and Isaac. They spent $57 on sandwiches per sandwich. And this is not, before you ask, this is not with a catering fee baked in. The catering fee was a different line item on this damn receipt, okay, on this invoice. These sandwiches cost $57 a piece. I make sandwiches for my kids every single morning using like roast beef and stuff. I could not make it cost $57.
Like what's in them?
What's
in the sandwich? Is it like foie gras and beluga caviar? Like
beluga caviar.
How do you possibly get to $57 per sandwich? A sandwich, by definition, is a fairly small thing. It's just 2 pieces of bread with something in the middle.
Isaac, what do you think they
pot
put
of gold
in
the
between
middle.
the pieces of bread? What do you think they put in there?
I don't know. Some sort of lobster sandwich, I guess, could warrant that cost. Although you are in BC, you could theoretically maybe get lobster for a bit cheaper. You're right on the waterfront there, but I have no idea.
There's no, so it would have to be, I would up you there. It would have to be like salmon, wild salmon off the West Coast, because the lobsters don't live on the West Coast. Except this one time, a family member of mine who was from Nova Scotia, this is a fun story, from Nova Scotia, and he was coming back home to BC, and he was bringing lobsters with him, like live lobsters, because you have to cook them. Sorry, animal rights people, you have to cook them boiling from when they're alive. But he had a layover at the ferry, and so he took them down to Horseshoe Bay and put like a little fence in the water and took out his lobsters and swam them around. And so all these tourists started taking pictures of him. So they thought that we had pet lobsters. Anyway, there was entire lore that started there. But yeah, this thing, for these sandwiches, I was envisioning like the golden goose. Like they killed the golden goose. They made, to your point, Alex, foie gras out of this poor golden goose. Then they sprinkled it with saffron and just added an inflation tax or something.
Like you said, it's a sandwich between 2 pieces of bread. There has to be some like super bougie bread too. I don't know what the most exquisite bread in the world is, but something crazy. Just to take us through a few other costs, because I had written about this article. Get this, $7.50 per bottle of sparkling water. Okay, I don't know about that one. Usually you don't have to pay that
much. It's like Woodstock 99 prices.
Were they on
and
a plane?
Then just for on the provincial level, of course, their 2024-25 deficit rose to $9.4 billion, which was a $1.5 billion increase from its initial forecast. And now the debt has risen to $130 billion, also surpassing previous forecasts. But here's what you need to know if you're a British Columbian. So this one's for you, Alex. British Columbians will pay $4.3 billion annually in interest on the provincial debt, amounting to about $757 per resident. So, and this is just what your politicians are spending their
That's
money on.
only
Here.
14 sandwiches, Isaac.
And that's just the interest. And for folks keeping along with at home, over $4 billion this year on interest, you could build almost 4 brand new hospitals for that. So it's a good way of picturing a billion, because a billion is 1,000 million. It can get kind of like overwhelming to understand how big that is. The next time you walk past a reasonably sized new shiny hospital, that's about $1 billion. So absolutely wild. I am laughing because I know it's infuriating. I'm laughing because otherwise you'll cry, because it's so infuriating. And also I'm laughing because we have to mock these people. These people clearly think very highly of themselves. Like, they think of themselves as landed dukes, which is why they can blow $57 per sandwich. And apparently the finance minister was asked about this by the media. To their credit, they stuck a mic in her face. And she doesn't think a $57 sandwich is extravagant. I think people should mail the Minister of Finance there in Victoria what they spend on groceries. Let them know. Let them know what they spend on their stupid BC carbon tax, which they need to get rid of yesterday, so she can get an understanding of how much a $57 sandwich actually costs the average person. Pretty wild, guys. I think that's all we have for today's fun. Thank you both for joining us. Alex, it looks like you're being broomed away from your location there in the US.
Yeah, that's right.
Move along, sir. We can't have you standing here.
That's right. That's right. It's starting to rain too. I was just going to mention, I went to Seattle.
Oh, he got cut out there.
The election there.
You said you
went to Seattle.
Whoa, stop. You said you went to Seattle and what?
I went to Seattle to cover the election, the U.S. election, and somehow I ended up in the Washington State Democratic primary building. They had kind of convention. I don't know if I'm still here. It was $27 per beer. U.S. Yeah, so that's almost, you could almost buy a sandwich with that.
$40, yeah.
My gosh. See, that's a perfect example of even the most ridiculous moments where you're trapped in a certain area and like that's all you can pay, like at a concert or something. This still eclipses that. And the people of British Columbia are dealing with disgusting costs of living. Like, people can't afford homes, they can't afford food, their transportation costs are through the roof. Like, that BC government should be ashamed of itself. Folks, thank you so much for watching. And remember, everything that we've said is off the record. Isaac, what's the most extravagant sandwich you've ever had?
You know,
like, think fancy. Like, was it grilled? Did you have mushrooms on it?
I'm sure I've had some extravagant sandwiches. They just don't come to mind because, it's just in your head. It's like, oh, it's just a sandwich, right? And I tell you, Kris, they definitely didn't cost $57. No matter how extravagant they were. I mean, are you kidding me? $57?
It's so gross. Alex, before you get broomed away by security, what was the fanciest sandwich you've had?
Oh, like, I'm super stingy. I'm a really cheap person. So at first I thought I couldn't think of anything, but it occurred to me in conversation, I have spent like $27 on a lobster roll once. Does that count? Is a roll a sandwich?
Yeah, a roll is a sandwich. I have a sandwich chart on the inside of my cupboard, and a roll counts as a sandwich. So does a hot dog, by the way. Fight me.